Hi, Mike Kennedy with a very informal kitchen video in between the parrot blasts. We're talking about flour, bread flour. Now, what's bread flour? Bread flour has a higher protein content. The higher gluten content, this protein that we're talking about is gluten. This gluten allows the dough to form in such a way that it creates all little kind of pockets that when you put the yeast in, the yeast starts eating things, and it basically, one of the byproducts of yeast is carbon dioxide. These little bubbles get caught in this interwoven thing of gluten, and as they get caught, it causes the bread to rise. So that's why we go to something, and there are a number of brands. This is the one that I use, but there are, like I say, there are a number of them. But going to this bread flour with a higher gluten content results in a better rise. And I have noticed this. I'm not just saying that because I've read it in a book. I used all-purpose flour for a long time. Then I switched to bread flour, and I did notice an immediate improvement in the quality of the bread that I'm making. Now, I do use a bread machine mostly. Today I'm not. I'm making, half using it. I'm making rolls, so I'm doing the kneading, kneading, and the first rise in the machine. Then I'm going to take that out, shape them into rolls. We're going to do chicken salad tonight, and then let them rise. Now my house is kind of cold, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my oven light, not the oven, just the light on, and put the bread in, the dough in there. And that's going to be warm. I've turned it on quite a bit earlier, so that the temperature in that oven is going to be in that near 80-degree range, which is the actual, kind of like perfect temperature for proofing or letting this bread rise. There are newer ovens that are coming out now that have a proof button. My current oven, it's funny, we got the super oven. We got it marked way down. It's like $1,000 less. It was a floor model at Sears, and we got it. But this model only goes down to 175. That's the lowest temperature you can program in it. And that's too high, because yeast basically dies somewhere in that, I forget exactly what, but somewhere in the 130, 140 degree range. That actually will kill yeast, and you don't want to do that. You want the yeast to live, so it can continue to make this carbon dioxide that will provide these bubbles and lift the bread. Rather than it being a flat bread, it's going to rise because of that. Now there are some other flours too for other purposes. We have, and it's funny, this flour isn't really that available. Is down south they have a flour that's made from what they call soft wheat, but it has a different protein characteristic, and it excels at making biscuits. And up here we don't have that. It's just not something you can buy off the shelves. You can of course have it shipped to you, but shipping flour is expensive. And it's funny, even the specialty stores around here, I've checked, and none of them have that. So these different, and then cake flour is, you can, which I've looked into and I'm going to try sometimes, you can kind of make it yourself by combining cake flour with regular all-purpose flour and kind of come up with this in-between that kind of fits in that peg. But there's pastry flour too, so there's all these different kinds of flours, and some of them are ground finer than other ones. And of course, everybody's usually by now familiar with the idea between whole wheat and regular flour. Whole wheat has the entire kernel of the wheat that is ground up, where other, the whiter flours, that kernel has been taken off, so they mill just that internal part, and it doesn't have the fiber and things that wasn't important. It just has that internal part to give that whiter flour. And the problem with using whole wheat usually is that it makes a much denser loaf. And one of the ways people combat that sometimes is you can actually buy gluten separately, and you add that gluten in to the whole wheat, and it makes it rise more. One little trick I've been using with my bread making, this has worked out well. Okay, so you make these, there's like 3 of us here. So I make this bread, and generally we eat it up before, but you can notice that because we don't use preservatives when we cook at home, that the bread can start drying out at the end. And of course, you look in regular store bread, there's all these ingredients that you've never heard of. Well, there are all kinds of different things to keep the bread, to retain moisture more, to keep the bread from spoiling so it lasts longer on the shelf, and all these different things. So far, the 2 natural things, and these, I didn't discover this is just kind of known. The 2 things that I've used so far with good success to extend the life of a loaf of bread is if you get dehydrated potatoes, the flakes, and you add 1 tablespoon per cup of flour when you're making bread, the potato starch tends to retain more moisture, so that as your bread ages, it stays moister longer. It also seems like it allows the bread to rise a little bit more too. And another aspect that I've done is you replace the sugar in the recipe for honey. Most of the recipes that I use, the size I use, have 2 tablespoons of sugar. Well, you swap out 2 tablespoons of honey. And the thing is with the honey is that it appears that even after the honey is cooked, a lot of times people say, oh, you can't cook honey because it destroys it, it loses its antibiotic properties. Well, to me it seems like I do start with raw honey when I'm making it, but of course this bread is being cooked, and it still seems that if you make it with honey, that the bread doesn't mold as quickly. So in other words, if you had 2 loaves, you get one with honey in it and one without, that the one with honey is going to stay longer. So those are just 2 kind of more natural ways using a food item where you can extend the bread. And personally, to me, I can't taste the difference that I've used honey instead of sugar and the potato flakes, but I must admit there are people, just like with music and different things, that some people's palates are so good they probably could taste something and say, why did you put this honey in here? I don't know, but I can't tell it's in there. So anyway, I'm going to be experimenting with some other tricks too. I was more interested in, sometimes I give bread to people and there's like just one in their family. So it's like, I guess you don't want to cut up a loaf of bread and give it to them, a smaller one. So I was more interested in this idea of how we can preserve breads. I even looked into the idea of maybe purchasing some commercial bread enhancers or things that increase the shelf life. But unfortunately, you have to buy like usually a 50-pound bag of something, and it's a good price. Plus, probably an ounce of it is a life supply for you. So, I'm not doing that. But there's some other things. There's an odd type of sugar you can use. It's supposed to do something. Citric acid is supposed to do something. And there are some different, things that you can add to modify the bread to last longer, or do something special about that bread, but you're still staying within the realm of items that are regular food items, and you're not pulling in some odd chemical or something like that. So there we go. Bread flour has more gluten, captures the CO2 bubbles from the yeast, providing a greater lift. And my 2 tricks that I've learned so far is that you can use the potato flakes and you can use the honey to increase the shelf life of your bread and just make it taste better, in my opinion. Bye.